She called herself a caregiver. She showed up every morning with a smile that could melt your grandmother's heart, and she did exactly that. Melted it, molded it, bent it toward whatever she needed. My grandmother Eleanor was 83 years old, sharp enough to finish a crossword in under 20 minutes, but lonely in the way that only widows of 30 years can be. And that loneliness was the open door that Diane walked right through. I hired Diane myself. That's the part that still sits heavy in my chest when I think about it. I screened her. I called her references. I sat across a coffee table from her in my grandmother's living room, watching her hold Eleanor's hand and laugh at her stories. And I thought, finally, someone who'll treat her like a person and not a burden. I was so relieved. I was so wrong. The first sign wasn't dramatic. It never is. It was a Sunday afternoon in March, about 8 months after Diane started. My cousin Marcus called me, the way he always does when something's bothering him, but he doesn't want to say it directly. He mentioned, almost offhand, that Grandma Eleanor had asked him to borrow $300. He thought it was strange. So did I. Eleanor had money. She'd been careful with it her whole life, the kind of woman who reused Ziploc bags and kept an emergency fund in a shoebox, and another in a savings account she'd had since 1987. She didn't need to borrow $300 from anyone. I didn't panic. I made a note of it and filed it somewhere in the back of my mind. 2 weeks later, Eleanor mentioned to me that she'd helped Diane with something. She didn't elaborate. I asked. She got vague in that way she sometimes did when she didn't want to start trouble. I let it go. Another mistake. It was a Thursday evening in May when everything cracked open. I'd stopped by unannounced. I did that sometimes, just to check on things, bring food, sit with her for a while. Diane had already left for the day. Eleanor and I were going through some old photos when she mentioned, completely without context, that she'd been meaning to check her bank balance because Diane said there might be a hold on her account. I felt something cold move through me, not panic, more like clarity. I asked Eleanor if I could help her check it. She handed me her little bank folder, the one she kept in the drawer by the phone, and I logged into her account online right there at her kitchen table. I scrolled through the transactions, and then I kept scrolling and scrolling. The withdrawals went back 14 months. Not all at once, that would have been too obvious. They came in waves. 2,000 here, 1,500 there. A wire transfer for 8,000 to an account I didn't recognize. ATM withdrawals in amounts just under the reporting threshold. Zelle payments to a name I'd never heard, but the account details mapped back to a shell that I'd later learn was registered to Diane's sister. There were also several authorized signatory changes on 2 investment accounts. Changes made with Eleanor's signature, except Eleanor's hands had been shaking too badly to sign anything legibly for the last 2 years. $950,000. That's what was gone. Not all liquid, some of it was in accounts that had been liquidated, funds that had been redirected, investment accounts that had been quietly drained over the course of more than a year. $950,000 that represented decades of my grandfather's savings, Eleanor's inheritance from her own mother, the equity from the house they'd sold in 2009 when she moved somewhere smaller. I closed the laptop. I sat very still. Eleanor was watching me with those soft brown eyes that always seemed to know more than she let on, and I smiled at her. I told her everything looked fine. There was probably just a processing delay, nothing to worry about. And she nodded, relieved, and went back to the photos. I drove home in silence that night. No music, no calls. Just me and the sound of the highway and the slow, controlled burn of what I'd just discovered. Because here's what I understood instinctively, even before I'd spoken to a single lawyer or investigator. If I reacted immediately, if I called Eleanor's bank that night or confronted Diane the next morning, I might recover some of it. But I might also spook her. She might move money. She might destroy records. She might convince Eleanor, sweet, trusting, lonely Eleanor, that it was all a misunderstanding, that I was overreacting, that she was the only one who really cared. I'd seen enough to know that the worst thing you can do when you've caught someone is let them know you've caught them. So I made a different choice. I decided to wait, to watch, to build a case so airtight that when the moment came, there'd be nowhere for her to go. I called my attorney the next morning, not from my cell phone, not from home, but from a payphone in a grocery store parking lot, because I'd already started thinking, like someone who understood this was now a war. My attorney, Sandra, has been practicing civil litigation for over 2 decades. When I told her what I'd found, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, very calmly, "Don't touch anything. Don't move any money. Don't tip her off. Let me make some calls." What followed was 6 weeks of the most controlled, precise, emotionally exhausting surveillance I've ever participated in. Sandra brought in a forensic accountant, a man named Gerald, who had the energy of someone's quiet uncle and the focus of a surgeon. He spent 3 weeks going through every account statement, every authorized access log, every transaction that had touched Eleanor's finances in the past 4 years. He built a timeline. He found the transfers. He traced the shell accounts. He identified the coordinated pattern because it was coordinated. This wasn't impulsive or opportunistic. Diane had done this methodically. Meanwhile, I still showed up at Eleanor's house. I still sat across from Diane at the kitchen table. I asked how Eleanor was sleeping, whether she'd eaten well, whether her physical therapist had come. And Diane smiled and answered every question and told me Eleanor was doing wonderfully. And I smiled back. I thanked her. I said she was doing a great job. I want to say it felt powerful. It didn't, not really. It felt like holding your breath underwater. Every conversation was an act. Every thank you was a performance. I cried twice in my car in Eleanor's driveway, once from anger and once from something I still can't fully name. Grief, maybe, for my grandmother's trust. For the version of Diane I thought I'd found. For the months we'd lost while this was happening. But I kept going. Because some things matter more than how you feel in the moment. 6 weeks after that night at Eleanor's kitchen table, Sandra called me on a Wednesday morning and said 4 words I'd been waiting for. We're ready to file. The lawsuit wasn't just a civil claim for the money. That's what most people assume, that you sue someone, a judge orders them to pay, and that's the end of it. It's rarely that clean, and Sandra knew that. What she filed was a comprehensive civil complaint for financial elder abuse, breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, conversion, and unjust enrichment. She also filed for an emergency asset freeze, that last part that was the move that changed everything. Because here's what Diane didn't know. Here's what she couldn't have known. Because she'd underestimated us at every step. Gerald had traced her, not just the shell accounts, not just the Zelle transfers. He'd found property. A condo in her name, purchased 14 months ago, right around when the larger withdrawals started, paid for in cash. A car, also cash. A savings account at a credit union 2 states away, opened the same month as the first wire transfer from Eleanor's investment account. Diane had been moving money, yes, but she'd also been spending it. And spending leaves a trail. The emergency asset freeze request landed on a judge's desk on a Thursday. By Friday morning, it was granted. Every account tied to Diane, her sister, and the shell entity Gerald had identified was frozen before Diane even knew the lawsuit existed. She found out when she was served. I wasn't there for it. Sandra advised against that, but the process server's notes described her as visibly shaken. She read the complaint. She saw the exhibit list. She saw 14 months of forensic accounting attached as evidence. She saw her own signature, or rather, the forgery of Eleanor's, flagged and annotated by a handwriting expert Sandra had brought on in week 4. I was at work when Sandra texted me. 2 words. She's served. I went to the bathroom and stood over the sink for a full minute, not celebrating, just breathing, just letting myself feel the weight of what had taken so long to reach this point. And then I washed my hands and went back to my desk, because the work wasn't over. Here's where I want to stop for a second, and if you're watching this and you've ever had someone betray a person you love, someone vulnerable, someone who trusted completely, I need you to drop a comment below. Tell me if you've been through something like this. Tell me you stayed. Because I almost didn't. There were nights in those 6 weeks where I came so close to picking up the phone and just screaming at her. And the only reason I didn't was because Eleanor deserved better than my anger. She deserved justice. Those are 2 very different things. Diane hired an attorney. Of course she did. A real one, not a public defender which told us she still had access to liquid funds we hadn't yet identified. Her attorney sent a letter within 10 days suggesting that Eleanor had gifted the funds voluntarily, that Diane had documentation of Eleanor's consent, and that any lawsuit would be vigorously contested. Sandra read that letter, put it down on her desk, and looked at me with the kind of calm that only comes from knowing exactly how strong your hand is. Let them try, she said. Discovery started 6 weeks after filing. And discovery, for those who don't know, is the phase where both sides have to hand over their records. All of them. Diane's attorney tried to limit the scope. The judge didn't allow it. Gerald's forensic timeline was so thorough, so precisely documented, that every objection Diane's team raised got knocked back. Every alternative explanation they offered, the gifts, the loans, the Eleanor asked me to manage this for her, collapsed under the weight of the evidence. The handwriting expert's report alone was 47 pages. 47 pages explaining, in precise technical language, why the signatures on those investment account change forms were not Eleanor's, why the pressure patterns were wrong, why the letter spacing didn't match 3 decades of Eleanor's documented signature. Diane had practiced. But she hadn't practiced enough. There was also the phone record, one detail that Sandra had flagged early, and I hadn't fully understood the significance of until it came up in deposition. On the same day one of the larger wire transfers was initiated, a $47,000 transfer to the Shell account, Diane's cell phone pinged a tower 2 blocks from Eleanor's bank. Not the branch Eleanor used. A different branch. One where a banker would later confirm that a woman matching Diane's description had come in that afternoon to assist an elderly client. Eleanor was home that afternoon. I know because I called her. She answered on the second ring and told me she was watching her shows. Diane's deposition lasted 2 days. I wasn't in the room again, Sandra's advice, but I read the transcript that evening. All 212 pages of it. By page 40, the story had already collapsed. By page 90, she'd contradicted herself on the same transaction 4 different times. By page 150, her own attorney had started asking for breaks that had nothing to do with scheduling. She settled. 3 months after filing, before the case ever saw a courtroom. The settlement included full restitution, the entire $950,000, structured across the condo sale, the liquidation of the accounts Gerald had identified, and a payment plan secured against assets. It also included a permanent injunction barring her from working in any caregiving capacity in our state. And it included a referral to the district attorney's office, which Sandra had already been in contact with, for a parallel criminal investigation into elder financial abuse. I'm not going to tell you what happened on the criminal side because that process is still ongoing. What I will tell you is that financial elder abuse carries serious consequences. And the evidence we handed over to the DA was the same forensic package Gerald had built, organized, time-stamped, airtight. Eleanor knows now. We told her after the settlement was finalized. We sat with her, me, my cousin Marcus, and Sandra, and we walked her through it slowly, carefully, with as much gentleness as the truth allows. She cried. She didn't say a lot. After a while, she got quiet in the way she sometimes does when she's processing something large. And then she looked at me and said, "I just liked having someone to talk to." And that broke something in me that I'm still putting back together. If you've made it to the end of this, and if you did, I need you to subscribe right now. Because I'm going to keep telling stories like this. Stories about fighting back, about doing the slow, hard right thing when the fast, emotional thing is right there waiting. Then you already know why I made the choices I made. I wasn't smarter than Diane. I wasn't faster. I was just patient, and I had people in my corner who knew what they were doing. Get your people. Know your people. And if someone you love is being cared for by someone you didn't vet deeply enough, go check. Don't wait for something to feel wrong. By the time something feels wrong, it's usually already been wrong for a long time. Eleanor has a new caregiver now, a woman named Ruth, who comes highly recommended, and who I background checked so thoroughly she probably knows about it. Eleanor likes her. They do the crossword together on Tuesdays. Last week, Eleanor finished it in 18 minutes. She's still sharp. She's still here. That's what matters. That's what we fought for.